This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to the Rebel Author Podcast, episode 73. Today, I'm going to be talking to Emma Byrne, and it is a super fun, super cheeky, bit light-hearted episode where we're going to be talking all about my favourite hobby, swearing, and why swearing is good for you. Now, this is actually a fascinating interview because we get into some of the psychology behind swearing, some of the neuroscience. It's not too heavy. Don't start turning off. Don't worry, we're not going to throw shitloads of science at you. It is genuinely fascinating and fun. And we also try to relate it to characters and stories and how you can incorporate swearing if you are, potty mouth inclined. First to last week's question, which was, what marketing tactic would you like to be better at? So Linda said social media. I don't necessarily hate it, but feel I'm so awkward and shouting into the void, basically. Meg Jolly said, I want to be better at Facebook and AMS ads. They're just gobbledygook. I really struggle outside of a launch cycle to keep them profitable. Tom said, I'd love to be better at ads. Of course, I'd love to have the time to learn them too. This week's question is a cheeky question. So I want to know, what is your favourite swear word? I hope we get lots of very creative suggestions and, naughty words. It'll be a very... I should add, this is a very sweary episode. There are basically no swear words that are not said in this episode. So if you are feeling slightly sensitive towards the older potty mouth blue language, then perhaps skip this episode or at least come back to it when you're feeling more sweary. So yes, this week's question is, what is your favourite swear word? Now, the book recommendation for the week this week is The Heroine's Journey by Gail Carriger. Now, I can't remember if I have already recommended this or not. I did go back and check the last 2 or 3 weeks to make sure I hadn't, and it wasn't in there, but that's not to say I haven't recommended it before. Now, I have read this book this week. I have, I think, 2 chapters left, something like that. Anyway, I have half read, half listened to the audiobook, and I have had a Gail in an interview. I've interviewed Gail. I've had Gail in an interview. I haven't had Gail, I can assure you, but I have interviewed Gail, and she is going to be on the show in March, and oh my goodness me, the epiphanies that Gail gave me were unbelievable. She was fascinating, so knowledgeable, and she's helped me fix Trey. And now I know I have got to the end of Trey, but obviously my critique partner has read it and I do need to make some changes. And having spoken to Gail, I need to make a few more changes. So it's probably going to be a good solid couple of weeks worth of work. However, I finally feel like I know what the problem was the whole time after this conversation. And so I've backed that up with going, because I'd already read some of The Heroine's Journey, but I've now gone back to finish it. And I just can't tell you how useful it was to speak to her and to read through this book. So I am recommending The Heroine's Journey by Gail Carriger this week. So in personal news then, just a couple of reminders. I've got the live Q&A with Mark Lefebvre coming up on wide marketing, and I'm so excited for this. 1, because I absolutely adore Mark, and 2, because I am really going to be pushing, once I get Trey and Sirens out later this year, I am really going to be pushing with the wide marketing. I sort of eased off on a lot of marketing my fiction just because I only had 2 books done, even though I have like almost 3 ready. Anyway, so yes, I will be very excited to have that. And that live episode, it's not an episode, that live show, whatever, is going to be on March the 17th at 8 p.m. GMT, 1 p.m. PST, 4 p.m. EST, and 7 a.m. Sydney time. One last quick reminder about the ProWritingAid Fantasy Week. If you are interested in writing fantasy, then they have got some amazing sessions with best-selling fantasy writers over the course of a week in February. I don't actually remember the specific date. I think it's like I feel like it's the last week of February. Anyway, I'm going to include the link in the show notes, and I am going to be attending it as well. So I better find out when that date is. So in personal news then, I have been busy recording the audiobook of 13 Steps to Evil. I have been working on side characters. Now, side characters was only supposed to be 40,000 words. It was supposed to be a book the size of Villains and Heroes, not a book the size of Prose. However, Sasha doesn't get what she wants, does she, this week? Because I surpassed 40k, and then I surpassed 50k, and I'm well on my way to 60k, and the finishing line is not quite within the reach that I wanted it to be. So I have a feeling this is going to be a bit of a beast of a book. I hope that also means it's going to be super useful to loads of you. But yes, Monday coming, the 15th of February, was supposed to be my deadline. That fucker's going to go straight past, and well, I'm not going to finish it. So yeah, I'm going to try really hard to get this book wrapped up as soon as possible, because I do want to have finished editing Trey this month as well. And we're halfway through the month, so I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, time seems to be evaporating at the moment, and I just can't seem to get a grip of it. I tried this week time blocking. So I know lots of people talk about time blocking, and I've never quite got it to work for me. So what I did this week was I spent Sunday evening doing like getting my inbox down, doing all of the admin that I had at that point, replying to emails, and then I shut my inbox and I shut everything down that wasn't writing. So I spent all day Monday writing, managed my second highest word count day ever, so obviously it paid off. And then I had all my meetings on Tuesday, and then Wednesday was my admin day, although I then felt like I'd done 2 back-to-back days of admin, because meetings to me are kind of our admin. Anyway, and actually that's weird, isn't it? Because to me, anything that isn't literally writing, so even if I'm like creating stuff but it's not words, I still feel like that's admin, which I shouldn't do because that's bollocks. Anyway, I'm procrastinating. No, I am whatever. Oh my God, clearly I need coffee this morning. Anyway, then Thursday I had a whole day to write, and unfortunately I was so tired, I barely wrote 1,000 words on Thursday, so I don't really know where yesterday went. And then obviously we are here today, so I'm going to try time blocking again next week, and I'm going to try the Sunday thing to make sure I don't have any admin hanging over me on Monday. But I don't know, I just don't feel like I am getting done what I should be, and I thought I'd try this time blocking thing to see if that would work, and I still don't seem to be getting the amount of words done that I need to be getting. But anyway, that is my update. I am making progress. I really do think I'll have side characters finished by the end of this month, hopefully anyway. The fucking thing stops expanding, and yeah, so you know, trying to be positive, trying to just survive in this lockdown nonsense. Oh my goodness me, I have to tell you about one other thing as well. So my favourite coffee for my sins is Starbucks coffee made with oat milk, because I'm intolerant to milk. It makes me very poorly. And I have been craving Starbucks. Now, because I'm intermittent fasting, it's very hard for me to drink coffee with milk. I basically can't drink it with milk because I don't open my window until like 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock for food. So I have been drinking espressos, and I was craving a milky coffee so much yesterday. And I did not know that Starbucks delivery was a thing. So I sort of posted on my Instagram. Very lovely lady pointed out to me that there is such a thing as Uber Eats, which I'd never heard of before. And I found it in the UK. I found that you can order coffee via Just Eat. Now, if you didn't get to see my Instagram story, I may have to like take a photo or something and drop it in the show notes, because my face when this fucking coffee turned up, it was literally the best day ever. And it just reminded me that small things can bring you joy, and you know, we have to take pleasure and happiness where we can, and sometimes it is in the smallest of joys, just a milky coffee after you haven't had one for a very long time, and it got delivered. Of course, it was a complete fucking indulgence, and it cost me far more than a coffee has ever cost me before. But I don't care, because I got a Starbucks delivered to my house and it was glorious. So yeah, I just wanted to share in my complete first world, overprivileged coffee this week, but it brought me so much happiness, and I can hear it in my voice how excited I still am at this revelation that you can get Starbucks delivered. And yeah, so my challenge to you this week is to go and find a small joy wherever you can, and just treat yourself, give yourself a small joy this week, be it a delivered Starbucks or a bath bomb or whatever. Okay, so Rebel of the Week this week is Stacey L. Fraser. Stacey says, I grew up being a good girl, which in my family meant who you were didn't matter unless someone else was watching. No room for screw-ups. I went on to pursue a very linear educational path with no idea what I really wanted, but I firmly believed that there was not a single creative bone in my body. Being a good girl, I was trained early on to have great discipline under the scrutiny of others' expectations. I lived on only to measure up. Left to my own devices, I was incredibly self-destructive to the point of addiction, but managed to maintain that put-together professional facade. Over the years, through a shit ton of therapy, I realised my life was based on so many false beliefs, rules I didn't choose but was continuing to live by as an adult, i.e. I am not a creative. Writing became my way of uncovering those false truths, and gave me the courage to discover what I really wanted. As I write this, I'm 9 days out from submitting my first novel to a developmental editor, and no one is holding my feet to the fire but me. No one is watching, making sure my ass is in the chair, and that is just fucking fine. Today, I write for me, for my dreams, and to share stories of hope and gritty perseverance that will motivate another soul to carve their own path. I write to share a story about a girl who grew up and figured out the only thing standing in her way was herself. Writing is my rebellion, story is my rebel cry, and I'm not fucking going anywhere. I love this so much. I love the empowerment. I just love everything about this story, and the fact that it's, that writing is so important. It has made such a life-changing has made such a life change for you. So yeah, and I think we all have these false beliefs that we need to work through. I know I definitely have had them in the past, and I'm sure I will have them again. If you would like to be a Rebel of the Week, please do send in your story, and definitely do, because the pod is always thinning. So it can be any kind of story, big, small, or somewhere in between. You can email your Rebel story to rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com or tweet me at rebelauthorpod. Although I would say I am much better at replying to email than tweeting, but suffice to say you can do either. So one new patron this week. Welcome, and a huge thank you to Jackson Hollingsworth. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of the patrons that attended the Patreon-only Poison and Prose. I have set the next one for the 16th of March, and I've actually just changed the time. It's going to be at 9 p.m. UK, just to allow those in Australia to join us as well. A huge thank you to all my existing patrons. I really, really appreciate you guys. And and hopefully more of you will come and join the Poison and Prose as well. I think we had like 10 or 11 of you guys come and join the writing session, so it was super fun. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, as well as bonus Poison and Prose sessions and such like, then you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. Alrighty, let's get on with the sweariest episode ever. Hello and welcome to the Rebel Author Podcast. I am practically fucking giddy with excitement for today's episode, because I am joined by someone who is possibly even more sweary than I am. Today I am joined by Emma Byrne. Emma is a honest-to-goodness robot scientist who, when she's not developing intelligent systems, writes for Forbes, the FT, and Global Business magazine. She also frequently appears on Sky News and the BBC, where I suspect she's very much less sweary than she will be today, and usually talking about the future of artificial intelligence and robotics. Her interest in neuroscience led her to her first popular science book, Swearing is Good for You, The Amazing Science of Bad Language, which I have read and was deeply fascinated by for very obvious reasons. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Sasha.
You are most welcome. I can tell you, the honour is all mine. And for anyone who is feeling mildly sensitive today, I mean, let's be real, if you're a listener to this show, you're probably not fucking sensitive. But if you are, we are going to do our absolute utmost to make this the most sweary episode in the history of the Rebel Author podcast. So buckle in, bitches. All right, so tell everyone a little bit about your journey, and I guess your career, and how you got to where you are now as an author.
Yeah, so I started out wanting to be in the field of AI because of reading Isaac Asimov, and particularly reading the ones with Dr. Susan, oh God, I forget her surname, but the robo-psychologist, and particularly the short story Liar, Liar, which I think is an amazing bit of storytelling in terms of revealing different mental states and different wants and conflict. It was only afterwards that I realised that he was a raving misogynist, and this was actually a pretty hideous view of women. I was about 12 when I was reading them, and also realised that the 3 laws of robotics have nothing to do with computer science and everything to do with narrative. But the seed was sown, and I started out bizarrely. My first fields of study were actually modern languages, because my mother was convinced that these would be useful, and also that I would grow out of my sort of techno-dyke phase. I have not. I have, if anything, grown into it. So yeah, she was well-meaning, but really believed that everything that was sort of not entirely feminine in my teens would be cured as soon as I became a real woman. Whereas no, just that hasn't happened. So I was always super interested in technology, and when I sort of finished my studies, I was like, fuck, I have made such an error here. Why the hell am I educated in French? I love it, and it's great for, you know, going over there and ordering cheese and wine, but not what I love. And sounding bien sûr.
Yeah.
Although I go French. Weirdly. I have a sliding scale of pitches. So when I speak French, I go a little bit higher pitched, but then I speak a very, very cursory amount of Japanese, and in that I sound like I've been inhaling helium, which is a little odd. I think in terms of more sort of butch to femme kind of sense, I am definitely more on my mask side when I'm speaking British English. And then I go super kawaii in Japanese. So the stuff in the book on swearing about how people with different languages to a bilingual degree do talk about having personalities, distinct personalities in those languages, really, really resonated. But I turned my back on the study of languages and went off and did a doctorate in AI, and have been doing lots of research in that field for about a decade and a half now. So how the fuck did I end up writing a book on swearing? I ended up working in something called a computational neuroscience lab, where we build models of systems that we know function in the brain, that we know of either from looking at neural recordings in things like rats or cats, or that we know from fMRI, that we have an idea of how these processes might interconnect. So I was looking at particularly the visual system in all primates. Fascinating entire podcast in and of itself, but we were based out of the Science Museum, which has this fantastic thing called LATES, or will do presumably post-pandemic, where they kick out all the kids, let in all the grown-ups. So I say grown-ups, they're mainly students from Imperial College next door, get a load of bar staff in, and then just basically go, look, science, engage with science. So one of the conditions of the lab's tenancy was we had to do experiments with the public. So I liberally interpreted that as being able to do experiments on the public.
I love it.
Ethics, what is those? So yeah, I found this brilliant experiment by a guy called Richard Stevens from Keele University, which is this: you stick your hand in ice water, and if you swear, you can do it for longer than if you're using a neutral word. So I pitched this, and like, yeah, sure, help yourself to ice and cold water. Risk assessment. What are risk assessment? Yeah, I look back and I'm like, that was probably fine. I've done it in every talk since, by the way, and like there's only a couple of venues that have gone, we need a risk assessment. How do you make sure that the person that you're getting to stick their hands in ice cold water isn't going to lose a finger? It's like, because people are in the main not stupid. Although I'm revising that in the light of recent events. So yeah, I found this brilliant paper on swearing and how it kills pain, and that was my first inkling that swearing is good for you. Swearing isn't something that, as I had been raised to believe, a sign of a impoverished intellect and of being deeply unfeminine. I can be deeply unfeminine and not swear, but it is very interesting that all of a sudden this whole world of citations opened up. I fell down this citation rabbit hole of, who's Richard Stevens cited about swearing and who have they cited about swearing. And before I knew it, I had literally a pile of papers about 2 foot deep on my desk, all about swearing. And I was nerding on about this. And at the same time, I happened to do a course that was run by the BBC Academy. They had something called the Expert Women Programme, because I think researchers at City University in the journalism department had noticed that the ratio of women to men on as talking heads, as interviewees, as experts on programs was fucking parlous. It's like, 1 woman to every 7 or 8 men. Like, this is ridiculous. What are you producers doing? And the producers went, we're trying. We ring women up all the time and say, please, can you come on and talk about such and such? And they go, I don't know if I'd be very good at that. I'm not the most specialist in that. You should talk to my colleague, usually James or Dave or Brian, because they probably will be better. Whereas they were saying, this is not me saying this, they were saying, if you ring up a chap, it's like, oh, hello, you're Mr. John Smith or Professor John Smith at the London School of Economics. Could you talk about coronavirus? And they're like, I don't know anything about it, but I'm very smart, so yes. We really have to redress this balance. So I was doing this academy program I applied for and got one of the places to be trained as a media expert, or at least an expert who could talk to the media without sounding like a complete dick or driveling on. Hi, it worked. Sorry. And part of that was pitch a producer. Get a story about something that you're expert in and pitch a producer. And I was like, I don't want to do one on AI. I'm kind of bored of what everybody's been saying about AI. It was before Elon Musk started wanking on about artificial general intelligence, which, like, frankly, dude, you massively underestimate the complexity of the human brain, so fuck off. Mind you, have you seen the state of this brain? I can see why he overestimates its complexity. Anyway, Elon Musk, person who inherited his fortune, reckoning that the world is going to be run by super intelligent robots way down the line at that point. Not much I felt I could say about AI. So it's like, I'm doing this research about swearing. And it was a producer, Giles Edwards, on Radio 4, who's like, that sounds interesting. And I was like, really? On Radio 4? Yes, tell me more. So I pitched him and I did this 15-minute show on, just swearing in general, what's going on in the brain when you're swearing. But someone else that I then met, I think at the Association of British Science Writers Conference, which if you have science writers who are not members of that, they should join the ABSW because they're great. They had a fantastic conference and someone said, you should pitch this as a book. I'm like, oh, I don't have time to write a whole book and then shop it around. And she went, what are you talking about? I was like, what do you mean? Have you not seen the book How to Sell Then Write Your Non-Fiction Book? No, this is not. I have one friend who writes novels. Not I have one friend. I have many friends, one of whom writes. I have some friends. I have one friend, and she writes novels. And of course the whole process for that is you write the fucking thing and then you hope that someone buys it, and you send your baby out into the world and people keep kicking it back in your lap and it takes forever. And I was like, my ego can't deal. They're like, no, you write a proposal. And I hadn't realized at the time that the proposal is probably about a third of the number of words of a complete book, but I was like, oh, I could probably do that. So I did that, and I shopped that around a bit. Got some really good feedback from various people, including a chap called Peter Tallock from the Science Factory, who, again, if you have any science writers who are listening, he is an incredible sort of agent developer, but I was not for him. And then eventually found my agent, who is Carrie Plitt, who just was so open to the idea of something that was a bit left field. So before I know it, I've signed on to actually, I say before I know it, like I hadn't put in months and months of work on this proposal. I'm signed on to try and develop this book. Just you know how it is. It's weird. It's sort of like afterwards you go, oh, and then I just sort of fell into this, and it's like I still have the fucking calluses for rewriting and rewriting, but this old thing. So yeah, no, I put the hours in, and I managed to get this book picked up. And it just kind of went from there. I suddenly realized that I thought it'd be one and done. I suddenly realized that I've been working in this field with a bunch of fairly blokey blokes, a lot of programmers for a long time, some of whom are lovely, one of whom I married, many of whom very good friends. But I had never been in a field that had such a broader representation of gender, that and it says something that publishing is the most diverse thing that I've worked in so far. Isn't that sad? But publishing is the most diverse industry I've worked in so far. And yeah, I know actually you should try tech. Oh my god. My stepdad was called Dave. He was a computer scientist or a software engineer, and he used to say the Dave to woman ratio in tech is hilarious. Like there's sort of 5 Daves for every woman. And I thought he was joking until I started working in tech. So yeah, publishing, met amazing people, and oh god, such a giving community. Science writers, science communicators, non-fiction writers, organizations like the Society of Authors. I suddenly realized this was the discipline I wanted to join. Academia has so much to recommend it, but the thing I used to say is what I love best about my job is being allowed to read a lot of stuff, find stuff out, and then communicate that to people. And all of a sudden it was just a no-brainer that here was a job that would let me do that full time. I mean, I was going to say with none of the admin. Again, that's bullshit. There is a lot of the admin, but the idea of being an entrepreneur, and again, listening to your podcast, I'm like, I've got to own this. I am a business person. It's not all, I just write silly books about swearing and neuroscience. And if people sort of get to see how science is done, that's very lovely. But it's, they just put it by the side of the toilet and dip into it. So, yeah, you worked your ass off on that. You did some decent research, and it's a good project, and you worked with some amazing people to bring it to fruition. So fucking own it. So that is my resolution for 2021, is to fucking own it, and to fucking own my professional identity. So thank you for that, Rebel Author Podcast, because yeah, that's how I came to do science writing, and not long form non-fiction. And I still do write about AI, and I am still very interested in AI. I'm not in a lab anymore, and at first I missed it terribly, but now I have so much more time to read, because that is in direct service of writing and that idea of filling a creative well. It is, for me, I don't know how novelists do this, but when I've got writer's block, it is as easy as just going to Google Scholar or going to the British Library catalogue and unblocking myself by finding another interesting paper, usually with a really hilarious picture in it. So yeah, I really love the field that I'm in, and it took me, I was 38 when I finally, sort of put my ink on a contract to sell a book. And it's like, oh my God, there's the before and there's the after. So I am forever thankful to that weird experiment in the Science Museum and that wonderful experience at the BBC and the amazing people, the agents, the editors who have given me the gift of going, I mean, I like it, but it could be better. But if you have you thought about this? Because I always thought writing would be horribly lonely, and for all that I'm an introvert, I also, do desire the affirmation of another human being wanting to talk to me now and again. So yeah, I love my life as a writer, and I love what I've learned. Yeah.
Would you ever come to the dark side of like indie publishing?
I would. I totally would. So Profile is a great fit for the stuff on sort of psychology and neuroscience, and also my editor there is gorgeous. But I would. Sorry, Rebecca, but you're gorgeous. But there are projects that I'm thinking of that are actually a big step out of my comfort zone. And by that I mean particularly memoir, so it would still be non-fiction. I am terrible at ask my 4-year-old daughter, tell me a bedtime story, tell me a new bedtime story, and I am terrible. But yeah, there are a couple of events in my life that at some point a couple of formative experiences, shall we say, that I would like to write about, and I feel that for that, independent side, I think now I'm starting to learn the business more. I would feel much more confident, but I do have friends. I have a friend, several friends who have done both traditional, someone else bears the risk of getting your book to market, versus indie, doing it yourself or using platforms like is it Readsy, where you can get buy services in. And I see advantages to both. I have no idea. I don't think the market's going to choose between one or the other. I think there is space for both. Yeah.
Okay, so we are here to talk about your book, Swearing is Good for You. And I totally agree. I swear like a fucking fishwife. Listeners only need to know that. But tell listeners, why is swearing good for you?
So there are ways in which it is good for you personally as an individual. The most compellingly researched one is the effect that swearing has on pain. The fact that if you're in pain or if you're having to do something unpleasant, swearing can really help you with that. You can withstand pain. You can use more force if you're doing something physical, if you are swearing than if you're not. It's also extremely useful for us on a societal level. So if you look at essentially, my favorite chapter in the book is one about chimpanzees learning sign language.
Yeah.
And as soon as they have dirty, they like that, yeah. They hit the underside of their jaws and their teeth like clack together. So it's a very it looks as satisfying as saying fuck, to be honest. Yeah. But the idea that as soon as an intelligent being has both a taboo and a means of expressing that taboo, they use that instead of violence is incredible. It has been good for us as a species. It has probably allowed a lot of us to live a little longer than we would have done if violence was everybody else's first resort. Yeah, I mean, we can all think of times when we've accidentally, upset someone, accidentally jumped a queue, and someone has reacted with the degree of anger that has moved them to swearing. But the fact that it moves them to swearing rather than physical altercation is a huge win for us as a species. And then the final thing is, swearing is good for you if you are a neuroscience researcher, because the ability for swearing to remain as a part of our repertoire of expression, even when the entirety of the rest of language is gone, tells us something really fascinating about the ways in which emotion and intention and cognition and even language are distributed in the brain. And they really are distributed. We can talk more about the brain structures involved if you like, but yeah, just to say that language, and particularly swearing, is what we call in computer science redundant. There are multiple ways of accessing it, like if you had sort of two machines running the same service, and if one goes down the other will take over. Swearing is so important that it is actually distributed in that way in the brain.
So I loved the chimpanzee section as well, but some of the other sections that I found fascinating were like the brain injuries. And I mean, I have a background in cognitive neuroscience, so this is, I mean, I'm perhaps geeked out more than the average writer would. But yeah, and how, if you damage your left hemisphere versus your right hemisphere, there are different effects and impacts on your swearing. But yeah, I don't know, do you want to just briefly like explain the different impacts, like if different sizes of your brain get damaged?
Sure. So for most right-handed Westerners, at least, the parts that help us produce language, that connect some sense of meaning, some semantics, with the extremely complex muscular coordination required to utter a word, are on the left side. There are two areas, Broca's and Wernicke's, named for the neuroscientists who discovered them, and they help us turn representation into utterance. And we know this because if those are damaged, people cannot turn representation into utterance. It is absolutely fascinating to read, at least to me anyway, to read case notes of brain surgery, because during brain surgery, the patient is kept awake. There is local anesthetic, but they are kept awake in order that the surgeons can check the boundaries of these areas in the brain, because it looks like a fairly homogeneous mass. I mean, there are structures that you can kind of map out, but in order to be certain that you found the functional boundaries, what you want to do is stimulate parts of people's brains with a small electrode. And if someone suddenly cannot produce words once you've stimulated this area, you don't want to cut there. So if you've ever seen the people walking down the road with spray cans and little sensors, just basically marking, here's the electrical cable, don't dig here, here's the gas pipe, don't dig here. They basically do that on your brain while you're awake, and then they know the limits of where you can cut. But we've actually known this for much, much longer. I was surprised by how impressively detailed Victorian neuroscience was, because of the post-mortem studies on people who had some kind of language deficit and then died. So now we can look at the brain using fMRI, or brain, if people are undergoing brain surgery, not brain surgery for the sake of looking at brains, but while you're in there, why not have a look around? And those Victorian neuroscientists like Broca and like John Hewlings Jackson, people will come to them and go, my patient has this weird thing where they can only say one word over and over again, or they seem to have forgotten how to speak, but they understand things perfectly. Or they're suddenly speaking a language they spoke in childhood and haven't spoken since, as opposed to the language they've normally spoken. And you wait for these people to die and then have a look at the brains. And it was consistently tumors or injuries to the left side of the brain that cause these linguistic deficits. But of course, your sample size is very small. You've got to wait for patients who have these deficits and then study their brains once they've died. So in any scientific career, you've got like maybe 20 brains you're going to look at. But we've known this for a long time, that left-hand side of the brain, for about 90% of us, is the areas responsible for language are housed there. But then just recently we started to unpack, what does that mean, being responsible for language? Because there is more to language than just the coordination of the diaphragm, the lungs, the teeth, the tongue, the vocal cords. All of these things are required to communicate verbally. And I think Sophie Scott is fantastic on this. The sheer muscular ballet of each and every phoneme that you utter. And so there are many parts of the brain that are involved in this. And it turns out that Broca's and Wernicke's seem to be very useful for turning something that we call sort of deliberate speech, or oh gosh, I'm sorry, there is a term in the book that's called clean out of my head, but that speech where you plan something and you withdraw, hopefully terms from memory, unless you've had a brain fart like I just did then, and turn those into utterances. But there are other parts of the brain that can turn emotional states into utterances. And the reason that we know this is that people who now we know while they're alive that they've had a stroke on the left side of the brain, because they've had a brain scan, we know exactly the limits of the damage, or they've had something called a left hemispherectomy, which is a radical surgery, it's removing the entire left side of the brain, can and generally do still swear fluently and appropriately. My favorite study on this was when they were talking about there's a protocol whereby you show aphasic patients with speech problems post brain injury a set of pictures to see what they can name. And some people might be able to name nouns but can't access verbs. Some people can access words but very slowly. Some people can't say them but they can draw the objects. There's all kinds of interesting things now we're starting to unpick about the link between semantics and utterance. But my favorite study of this was they're talking about showing this particular patient, a picture of a chair, a picture of a watch, a picture of someone running. And they painstakingly detail the utterances of this person. Patient, I think his name is D in the paper, D pauses for 5 seconds and makes a frustrated, breathing out, or, in response to the picture of the match, he looks at it and then goes, d, 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 and then stops. And then they show him a picture of Ronald Reagan, and it just says D responded with a particularly fluent stream of swearing that was sort of like normally produced, but they don't tell me what. It's very annoying how mealy-mouthed some of these researchers are about actually recording the swear words that are used. Amazing amount of papers about swearing with no swearing in. Fascinating. Anyway, turns out that you can have the entire left side of your brain removed and still manage this complex muscular ballet that is the production of words, as long as those words are incredibly emotive. And that to me is fascinating. We're still not quite sure what that content is and how it is linked to those motor processes of speech, but it exists. And many months after writing the book, I was on a radio show talking about this. And one of the producers collared me afterwards and said, I didn't know that. And I wish someone had told me that. I was like, why? My dad had a stroke about 1.5 years ago, and we thought had lost all of his language. But we went out for a picnic a few months ago, and we were sitting, on this hilltop, and he hasn't said my mum's name. for a year. He's not said, I love you. He hasn't been able to tell her what he needs. He's been getting angry and frustrated because he can't do things or say things. But they're sitting there having this picnic, and a red kite flew down, the bird of prey flew down and nicked his sandwich. And he just went, fucking bastard. And my mum was heartbroken, because it's like, why can't he tell me that he loves me, but he can call a bird a fucking bastard? So that's because it's in a different part of the brain. I know. And I'm like, oh my God, the Stroke Association should totally tell people this. Your loved one may swear. It's not that they're withholding the rest of their speech. It's just that words that are that emotive tend to be preserved, and we know it must be on the right side of the brain somewhere, because even when the left side is completely excised, we can still swear. Most people can still swear. The other one that's fascinating, and one day I don't know, write a book about sense of humor or something, but I'm fascinated by the fact that right hemispherectomy, or right hemisphere damage anyway, is connected with people suddenly losing all understanding of non-literal speech and of joking and of metaphor, and they just end up with like no sense of humor and also don't swear either. So they become sort of like, I guess, the kind of stereotypical Midwestern American, of like the sort of bless your heart brigade of, no swearing, no irony, no joking.
It's literally like my worst fear in life is like not being able to be like disgustingly antisocially sarcastic and sweary. Like I just, what is life without swearing and sarcasm? One of the things that I love is that swearing is both functional and emotional, and I find this whole subject so fascinating, and the fact that swearing isn't just located in one area in the brain. Like there's different, and each of those different areas in the brain is controlling a different type of, like, because before I swear emotionally, like emotively, and I swear functionally, but like I would never have realize that those were separate types of swearing. So this is awesome. And in talking about different types of swearing, I found the sections in your book about the differences in regional swearing fascinating. Like you mentioned, and I am practically senile, so I don't remember the nuances and details, but like the difference between Canadian French people and French people living in France with native French there, and the fact that they swear differently. And I think, like, as writers, we often create characters from different areas, be they fantastical or literal, real set in contemporary situations. So this is something, that we could use in our storytelling in terms of like the types of swearing we use or don't use for that matter. So I'd love you to talk about the differences in regional swearing, and especially about like how liberal and creative we English are with the word fuck versus like the countries who have mustache insults, which I just thought was fascinating. And I suppose like the translations as well, because I know that there was something that was being translated into Spanish, and we don't, because we use fuck in so many different ways, it was very hard to translate. So just talk to me about regional differences in swearing.
I mean, this really tweaked the part of me that did start out studying languages, and it was fascinating. There is a researcher, he hasn't written anything popular linguistics-y yet, and I wish he would, but he's called John Mark Dwala, and he's at Birkbeck, I think, and he interviews people who are like polylingual, talking not just bilingual but quadrilingual and fluent in all of them, and he has discovered some fascinating patterns. I think it was his research, at least through his research, that I first got onto the stuff that looks at people. And if you learn a language before adolescence, you tend to swear emotively in it. If you learn it after adolescence, it goes one of two ways. If you find swearing in your own language emotionally too difficult, you got an awful lot of censure for it growing up, there's a tendency to adopt the second language swearing as being sort of slightly easier to talk about. Whereas if you were fine swearing in your first language, you tend to carry on with that and not find the second language swearing quite so compelling. And in looking at that, he's been able to unpack, is it that there are some things that are just universally more offensive? And the answer is no. It's so culturally dependent. You mentioned the example of Canadian French versus European French, and the fact that words like tabernacle, it is a swear word, and appears in Canadian hip hop, which was not a sentence I'd ever typed before the book. And so that is a really interesting example of essentially divergent evolution in swearing. For me, there's also the example of, I think the word cunt is a real, it's an amazing way of working out somebody's age if you know where they come from, or where they come from if you know their age, particularly if you know the target. And the reason for that is that in the United States, the word cunt has only ever really been levied against women. It is almost exclusively a misogynistic slur. In the UK, if you came up in the sort of 70s and 80s and that wave of feminism, it was seen as a phenomenally misogynistic swear word because it was mainly used by men against women with whom they did not agree. Then came ladette culture, which is my era because I'm old now, where the height of performing one's feminism, I'm so embarrassed right now, it's the height of performing one's feminism, was basically things like being able to neck a pint faster than any of the blokes in the bar, and calling all your male friends a cunt. And then now your younger listeners will be going, can you stop saying that? Because internet culture now means that the American use of that word, of it having more misogynistic overtones, it's in the YouTube comments under several of my videos. It tends to arrive in my DMs, but it's like I was wearing plaid shirts in the 90s and downing pints and calling my male mates that word, and I don't think that they ever called me it. I think they still residually went, oh no, you can't call a woman that, you can only call a man that. So there was obviously a gendered element, but there was an element of reclaimed usage that really brackets me, having now spoken to people about the use of it, that really brackets me as either I'm from England in particular and came up as a ladette, or I'm from Glasgow. My favourite talk was I actually did one when the book first came out as part of the book tour. I went up to Glasgow to talk about swearing. It was just the most redundant thing. I went there as an acolyte and as it's sort of like in Karate Kid, I went up there and I'm like, swearing, I am interested in it, teach me all. And it was great. But yeah, the word cunt is laden in misogyny, and it's one of those ones that hovers between swearing and slur. There are other words that are quite definitively slurs in most languages that I know of now, and that things to do with race and sexuality, we are more aware of the power of those words to hurt, or the way that those words are used by people who are simultaneously hurtful, which then, again, swearing is so emotive, slurs are so emotive. I don't use the N word because I cannot possibly understand what it is like to hear that word and wonder if it is the prelude to someone punching me in the face for my skin color.
Yeah, so I feel exactly the same way. And so thinking about the regions, and I have no idea if you have an answer to this, but is there a sweariest country?
I'm not sure that there is. I think we are, translators would be really good at answering this question. But in my research for the book, it turns out that there is no country in the world that does not have words for expressing frustration, annoyance, or even, elation and happiness. The only difference is which taboos are broken. So in Japan, for example, crap is no big deal. That's why we have a poop emoji. Because it's just like, hi, I'm sending you a friendly poop. There is a building, I think it was designed, I can't remember who's designed by, but I think it's the headquarters for the Asahi Brewing Corporation. And it's meant to look like the top, there's this sort of bulbous golden thing that apparently, according to the designer, was meant to connote the wisp of like foam on the top of it blowing off the top of a beer bottle, but is known as the golden poop, the golden shit, which, that would be like calling the BBC calling the gherkin the dildo, which they should. But it's to us it's like that's weird. That why would you do that? But it's because shitting isn't a big deal, whereas saying that someone is stupid has the same force as, again, a very ableist slur in this country. So it's not that they're less sweary, it's just that when you first encounter the language, the swearing is not where you think it is. Mm-hmm. And if you say, I'm an idiot, my therapist would be like, can you stop doing that? It's negative self-talk. But also, if you do that in Japan, it would be like calling yourself the R word. What? Don't use that word. That's horrible. And the other one was, is it maneko, which is basically a vulva. And there's some brilliant stuff about, it's like everything's fine until someone says vulva, and then everybody just falls over. And someone was actually.
I was just saying, it's like in Dutch, isn't it? Like the one of the worst swear words is cancer in Dutch.
I know, and it feels like word magic, which is this idea that you could, because this is the long historical connection. There's a historian called John Gallagher who's really good on the sort of historical connection between cursing and swearing, and this idea that you are using a taboo, but it's a taboo that can actually harm the person. You're wishing harm on that person, and we don't really use that much in this country. We tend to stick to body parts and body functions. But yeah, you mentioned mustache, which is to do with male virility. Saying you have a poor mustache is, I guess, kind of a bit like in the States when people are now really enjoying calling each other cucks. It's like,
I have not heard that one.
Oh, you've not heard cuck? It's a very specific niche of porn. It derives from the word of cuckold, and the idea of guys getting off on their wives being banged by usually a black person, and so far right tends to use cuck, or when what they mean is race traitor, and it's really nauseating, yeah. It oh man, there are some deeply wounded people on who are very convinced that no, I'm not even going to go into what they're very convinced of. It's just terrifying how threatened they feel. It's so at odds with reality.
So let me ask you, what is your favourite swear word?
Oh man, it's like saying what's your favourite pube. I mean, I love them all and I need them, and I've got fewer and fewer as the years go by. I don't know. I have. It's not my favourite swear word, it's my favourite moment of swearing in my life. No, I have a new one. Oh, I'm sorry, British Sign Language interpreter, you've been demoted. So it used to be when I was doing the talk at the Science Museum, many years after I'd worked there, when the book finally came out, I did a talk at the Late saying, back to the spiritual home of swearing is good for you. And I had a British Sign Language interpreter, which is wonderful. More events need this. And she was amazing. She was keeping up. She was fantastic. She was like, I don't know BSL in detail, but I felt well translated from what I could see. And I'd mentioned the portmanteau swear words, this idea of the bathos of cockwomble, which I think she spelled out for me, finger spelled cockwomble. And then I said, spunk trumpet. And she just looked at me and went, "You're on your own." You're on your own for that one. I just spunk trumpet. It's probably something that one could do for spunk trumpet. But actually, my favorite instance of being present for someone else's swear word was, we went to one of those, you're a parent, you've probably been to one of these family resorts when your kids are quite young, and you're going, it would be great to go somewhere where we could go to a nice restaurant for dinner, but the kids need to be in bed by like 7 o'clock, so we're going to go somewhere with a family buffet where they can just throw pasta on the floor and nobody's going to roll their eyes. So we had a few years of those sorts of holidays. And the second one of those that we went on, my daughter would have been nearly 2, and we'd shoved her in a high chair. She does not take well to being restrained, never has. Very active baby. Stuck her in this high chair and said, "Look, you have to stay in here. It's very busy. People are walking around with plates of hot things. So just until we finish eating, and then as soon as we've finished eating, we'll go back outside again. It's not forever. Okay." So she's eaten her pasta and I'm finishing my dinner. And then she just turned around to me and went, "Mummy, get me out of this fucking high chair." And I was like, the intonation was perfect. The choice of the caliber of swear word, absolutely ideal. The fact that she responded to her frustration by saying, "Get me out of this fucking high chair," and not hurling cutlery on the floor or throwing her juice, that was a precious moment to me. And when the book first came out, she had been born about sort of 8-9 months before, and people were like, "What will you do when your daughter starts swearing? Have you stopped swearing? No, you're a parent." Fucking hell no. But I'm going to talk to her about the emotional meaning behind swear words, and we talk a lot about the emotional meaning behind swear words and why you have to understand your audience before you use them, which is my don't say that at nursery, don't say that in front of Nana, but sort of say, that's a word that, it's a good way of telling mummy how you're feeling, but Nana and Grandad probably would go, "I feel things about that word," and not listen to how you feel. And that's what it comes down to with swearing. And the whole chapter on Tourette syndrome is, we tend quite often when we hear swearing is to think about how we feel, not how the speaker feels. And so to me, I now respect swearing, and I do some volunteer work on a helpline, and I find that swearing, I'm not going to say it doesn't affect me emotionally, but I am conscious of that emotional effect, and I separate it very quickly from what the person's telling me. I use it as a register of the state of their emotions. And again, I think this comes back to, in fiction, characterization. There's a theory that I know of from, I have another friend who does acting, and talks about the pinch and the ouch, and how it's very unconvincing. If you get a little pinch on stage, characters gets a tiny pinch and you go, "Ah!" or someone slaps you in the face and you go, "Ooh." They've got to match the pinch and the ouch. That swearing is the ouch that tells you how bad the pinch is. And I find that I don't have a preferred swear word, but times that I hear swearing used authentically to express either enthusiasm, joy, frustration, sadness, grief, anger, I now am better able to be with that person's feelings than going, "Oh, my feelings about that swear word." But I think it helps that I always thought swearing was fucking brilliant anyway.
I was definitely a young swearer, although I didn't swear in front of my mum until I was 16. I just kept her in the dark over my sweary nature. But I have always been a swearer, and I have always had sort of the elder people in my family ask me not to swear, and I just can't stop.
Fucking can't.
I can't. Exactly. It's fantastic. When I was pregnant, everybody sort of said to me, oh dear, what are you going to do when you have children? And for the most part, I try not to swear in front of him. But everybody was convinced I would be the one that would teach him the swear words. And so one of my favorite swearing stories is the first time my son ever said a swear word. And he was 2, and the week prior. Now, my wife will she queries this. She doesn't say this is what happened, but in my words, she called me a fucker. I can't remember why. She was upstairs, I was downstairs, something had happened. Anyway, so she calls me a fucker. And Atlas hears this. This is our son's called Atlas. And anyway, nothing happened, and we were like, okay, thank God we've got away with it. Anyway, then at the childminders the following week, she'd sort of said no to him about something. He couldn't have this toy. Anyway, and so she was going upstairs for a wee, and he stood at the gate and looked up at her and went, "You fucker." And she just said she absolutely died. She had to just walk up because, and I can't help it. Whenever I hear a child drop out a swear, and when you hear these TikToks or whatever, I mean, it is just literally the funniest thing I have ever. I am when you're about to herniate, you're laughing so hard. And so I'm pleased to say that I am not the one that's taught our son the swear words, even though everybody thought I would be. But he finds swearing delightfully hilarious, so I'm sure he will be also a swearer when he gets older. We're almost out of time. I can't believe it. I have so many other questions I wanted to ask you. So I'm going to just pick a couple of last questions. So thinking about, I guess, fiction and our characters, a section in your book, you talk about how there's quite a stark difference between male and females, or at least there was historically, and it is sort of becoming a bit more even now. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it might help writers to consider how they create swear words, or how they put swearing into the mouths of male and female characters in their stories.
Sure. I mean, historically, up until I think it's the late 1600s, there really wasn't much difference. There's no sort of belief that swearing was more male than female. And then this guy called, there are several people who get the middle name fucking in my life. My daughter is now the other day, I was just something on the news, and she went, "Is it Donald fucking Trump?" But the other person who gets that as a middle name is Richard fucking Alistry, who wrote this pamphlet called The Lady's Calling, and it was all about correct deportment for women. And it was very much this idea of patriarchal, guys are in charge, guys know stuff, women obey them, and then model obedience to children. And he writes in this that he can't imagine, there is no sound more odious to the ears of God than an oath in the mouth of a woman. Not the sound of a child who is crying in hunger, or the anguished wails of someone who has just lost someone they love. No, me saying bollocks is what makes baby Jesus cry. Okay, fine, Richard. But this idea takes on, it's weirdly popular. And has stayed with us. And there's a kind of certainly in British English, and you see this in other cultures as well, that the more patriarchal a society is, and the more there is this belief that you have men with power, women with custodial responsibility, and children who are to be protected / indoctrinated, swearing is taken away from women. Which is odd, because still the line I could not, that I knew my editor was going to be the editor I want to work with forever, which was, why the fuck someone like Richard Alistry would think that women could be kept from swearing when we're the ones who give birth, so we know, or that we know about pissing, shitting, and bloody cunts. I mean, it's just the bodily functions required to do what women were called upon to do almost universally at that time, which is to bear children. You have to know about swearing, or you have to know about the content that swearing is usually about. So he's arguing for this purity of mind of women, and that has stuck. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it was always a myth. But the problem is, it was such a pervasive myth that people who wrote female characters, who were predominantly men, bought into this myth. So women in fiction were written as non-swearers, and the fiction became stronger than fact, and women believed that they themselves or their friends were aberrant in that they were swearing, but of course in general women don't, when of course in general women do, and the fiction was aberrant. You know, I was sort of thinking of a sort of Victorian Twitter account of Men Right Women, of just, you know, she faints when she hears the word trousers. I mean, seriously, that's up there with vagina purses. It's just you don't understand women. But fiction, the stories we tell, the narratives that we privilege, shape society. And so women grew up with this belief of, you know, I have these strong feelings and there are these words that I am not allowed to use. And it's only when female researchers came on scene in the mid 20th century and started asking women, do you swear, that they started getting honest answers. But up until that point, all of the research had been done by male researchers who would talk to the very few female undergraduates and go, do you swear? And no, sir, no, of course not I. I swear? Of course not. I am a proper and healthy woman.
Yeah, of course I don't.
Yeah, because it was like, you know, if a woman swears, she must be mentally ill or morally defective.
I do hope so.
Yeah. I mean, I'm both, but I like to think I still have the right to swear. You know, you know, I have long-term depression, and there are many things I've done that I'm sure would get me written up horribly in the Daily Mail. But even if I hadn't, even if I had been pure as the driven snow and been jolly every day of my life, I reserve the right to call someone a fucker. If 2-year-olds are allowed to call people fuckers, I don't see why I'm not. So this idea of, if you're writing historical fiction, the idea that women would swear freely and feel cool about it is probably a bit of a stretch, but the idea that women don't swear at all owes more to fiction than it does to reality. And looking at women's private correspondence and diaries is the thing that reveals all of this. And also the fact that Charlotte Bronte, who wrote the foreword to Wuthering Heights, I have to stress, she wrote the foreword. I know she didn't write Wuthering Heights. I'm sorry that it says that in the book. She just wrote the foreword. But writing as Cara Bell, she said, you know, that this is how people talk, and there is no point putting dashes or asterisks to cover the words. It doesn't do anything to help. Actually, neurologically, it does a bit, but it is pointless. If you are writing about people who speak this way, then they should speak this way. And she's fucking right.
Absolutely. Okay, this is always my favourite question. This is the Rebel Author podcast. So tell us about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Gosh, I mean, turning my back on the expectations of, you know, go and do a useful degree of languages and become a bilingual secretary, and going, no, mother, I want to be a robopsychologist, and doing that. Susan Calvin, just remembered her name. That was a huge rebellion to me, and I wore that heavily early on. There was this belief that I was going to do something that involved stepping into a field where there weren't many people like me. And I'm white, but I am, you know, female. I don't have the tits to pass as anything more androgynous than female. I mean, I do. Sorry, yes, I am. I have been. My cups runneth over. So, you know, I am obviously a woman in tech, and there have been times when I thought, you know, my mum was right. I don't belong here. the slightly misogynistic bants, the constant belief that, you know, as I'm a woman, I must be there to do the sort of pretty design work. I started a job at a university as a machine learning expert, as you know, my AI background, in a medical department. And on the first day, my supervisor went, "Oh, I know what you can help us do. You can help us choose the colors for our website."
I hope you ripped him a new asshole.
I wish I'd ripped him a new asshole. I did say, I look at how I'm dressed. If you're relying on me for design inspiration, you are, because I tend to wear I wear a lot of grey. I say, if you're relying on me for design inspiration, you are royally, I don't think I said royally fucked, but that was the, you know, I said, do I look like someone with a great aesthetic sense? But, you know, the subtext was very clear. You know, you're and previously I'd had, are you sure you wouldn't rather be, you know, sort of gathering customer requirements than doing actual coding? You know, and again, I think like a huge rebellion, turning to my supervisor and going, what is it about me that makes you think I would prefer to do that? And I have found whenever I need to rebel against people's expectations, that this is the question that always helps. It is, what is it about me that makes you think I would want to do that? And quite often that makes people confront their assumptions. And sometimes people go, "Oh, I thought because you were a woman." Wow. That your ovaries are naturally very good at choosing hex codes for websites.
No, my ovaries are naturally very fucking angry.
Yeah, I know, right? Mine too.
Yeah,
more
I know,
so
right?
As I hurtle towards the menopause.
Exactly. My vagina is pissed that it had to put a baby out. Like, it is not happy.
Absolutely. If I remake a feminist version of Falling Down, it's going to be very clear what bit is falling down.
Oh, thank you so much for your time today. Can you tell listeners where they can find out more about you and your books?
Yeah, so I do have a website at emmabyrne.net. Byrne is Byrne. My first book is currently available on a bookshop, uk.bookshop.org. Swearing is good for you, and all others, but uk.bookshop.org is lovely for indies, whereas Jeff Bezos' firm can go fuck itself till it pays people a living wage. And oh god, I love basically hoping that I don't get cancelled by capitalism. So yes, Swearing is Good for You. Look for that on at your nearest independent bookstore, or if you're still in lockdown, look on bookshop.org. And also How to Build a Human, which is coming out in June, is currently available for pre-order on Waterstones and should be on bookshop.uk, uk.bookshop.org soon. And then finally, follow me on Twitter for SciRiBi. So SCI like science, WRI like writing, and BY like Byrne, where I'll probably say more things about Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. So, you know, if that floats your boat, fine. If not, stay the hell away.
Amazing. I have had an absolute ball today. Thank you so much for joining me.
It has been the dog's bollocks. Thank you.
Yes, it fucking has. And thank you, of course, to all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, as well as joining me for things like Poison and Prose and getting extra bonus goodies, then you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. Thank you, of course, to everybody listening. I hope we still have listeners. I hope your ears are not bleeding from our blue-mouthed, potty-mouthed excellence. And if they are, too bad. I'm Sasha Black. You are listening to Emma Byrne, and this was a very sweary Rebel Author podcast. This week, I'm going to be joined by somebody I really admire and I have looked up to in this industry for, well, basically since I began. So next week, I am going to be joined by Joanna Penn, and we will be talking about author business plans and long-term thinking, and yeah, like how you can crack I guess, your business plan and your future as a indie author. So join me next week for that. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.